Someone referred to the original sin that was committed in this country, the taking of land from the indigenous people of this country was the original sin.
Because even the poorest white person who doesn't have a land, who has got nothing, you pick up that person at the robots and say, what is your view about land expropriation? That no, leave the land alone.
Government spent more in that financial year on VIP protection services for cabinet ministers than they spent on the entire land reform program. Spent more on VIP protection services for cabinet ministers than they did on the entire land reform process.
The subject of land is a very important subject at the moment in South Africa. A lot of people don't actually quite understand, when we're talking about land, a lot of people always think that we're talking about land for commercial reasons. A lot of people will say, a lot of African people don't actually want to farm. So the issue for them is around the fact that Africans want to farm, and so they look at people's farms and they envy those farms, but then they're going to take them over, like what happened in Zimbabwe, and then nothing's going to happen. But land is not just a commodity that we trade between us. It's not something that's just there for us to sell, but actually land is something that's designed to give us a sense of belonging. If you look at the book of Genesis, you'll see that Abraham purchased land, and even when he, had died, he made sure that his bones would be buried in the land that he had purchased. So it wasn't so much about buying the land so that he can trade it for commercial reasons, but it was a place to say that I am buried there, my forefathers are buried there. It's a place really that gives us a sense of belonging. I'm a South African, I live in South Africa, but sometimes if we, claim to live in a place but actually don't necessarily own the place, it does give us a sense of always being visitors in the place that we live. Being people who are almost like foreigners in the place that we live. And it does contribute to things like imposter syndromes. If I'm always going in places in South Africa and never actually have a sense of belonging, I don't belong here, I'm a visitor here, but I think that when you have ownership of something, of a particular space, a part of the country that you own, man, you can really have that pride to say, I belong in this country, I own a piece of it. It gives you that sense of belonging. I'm home because I own a home. Now, if you look at the stats from the land report of 2017, you will see that in terms of race, about 72% of the land is owned by basically 7.2% of the people. And then basically those people are white people. And then after the white people, you will have about 15% of the land owned by colored people who make up about 8.2%. And after the colored people, you will have the Indian people who own about 5% of the land, and they make up about 2.7% of the population. Now that's ridiculous, because coming in at number 4, you have 82% of the population only owning 4%. Now, if you just compare that with the Indian population, that's only 2.7%, it still owns more land in terms of percentage than the 82%. So it's definitely something that's a problem. It's something that needs to be addressed. And it's important as well as we go into our elections for us as Christians to think, so how do we vote, in relation to all of these things? The church, as we're going to find out in the video that's coming up from Pastor Thabiti, who is a pastor at Anacostia River Church in Washington, D.C. And so he basically is a Christian theologian, very respected person. And he'll be giving us some biblical principles of how we can think about these things. When we're making decisions as to who to vote for, we actually have a biblical framework that helps us to make better decisions, to speak out much better about these things, social issues, justice issues, and so on. And so I think it's important that we understand, even when you look at the policies of the political parties that we have, like if you look at the ANC's land policy, it's different to the DA's policy. The ANC once put a notion in Parliament to say that land must be expropriated without compensation, which is something the DA is opposed to, obviously, because they believe that this will affect, investors who are coming outside of the country. For an example, if Coca-Cola has land ownership in the country, and then it's expropriated without compensation. Why would they want to invest in a place like that? But the ANC says, no, we need to address this thing. They put that motion forward, and nobody actually voted for them. Even the EFF also rejected that notion, because their policy is also different to the ANC's, because the EFF believe that if you give land to poor people, for an example, it's easy for someone else to come in and pay them money or buy them out. And which is something we even see from the RDPs, that people will get RDPs for free, but then they'll choose to rent them out because most of them actually are looking for money and so on. So it's easier to buy people out. So the EFF's policy says, no, all of it must be owned by the government. Therefore, nobody can actually buy them out and so on. But the problem is that real, genuine land ownership, if it's owned by the government. So Pastor Thabiti is going to give us some perspective on some of these topics. And I really hope that you guys will be encouraged as we go into the elections to sort of make better decisions as you vote for the political parties that you guys have chosen. So here's Pastor Thabiti.
Yeah. Well, no, I do think it's important to address it. I think we have to be careful that there's a responsibility. The responsibility for addressing it will differ depending on whether we're talking about the church or the individual. And so, for example, I don't think the church has a biblical command to be engaged in partisan politics, right? To be trying to elect people and lobby for this policy or that policy. But we do have a very clear biblical demand to make disciples, right? Who obey everything that Jesus taught. And that means we have to teach people how to live under the lordship of Jesus Christ in every area of human life, including politics, right? So the church needs to be a teaching engine, a disciple-making engine that helps people learn how to think Christianly about issues like land distribution, right? Or any other issue of justice, right? And then we need to equip those persons to go out and to bear witness on those issues in a way that is consistent with the Bible and with their own individual conscience, right? So on an issue like government redistribution of land, there might be many proposals out there, and none of them more biblical than the other. They're just different, right? I don't think the church is called to take a position on one of those proposals, but I do think Christians who have been equipped by the church are called to go into those discussions and to sort of make sure they are advocating for righteousness and justice, in those things. Because our vision of the good life is not just that we are saved individually and we have a personal relationship with Jesus. Our vision of the good life, 1 Timothy chapter 2, is that we live a peaceful and quiet life in all godliness, right? Our vision of the good life is that we do good, Galatians 6, we do good to all men, especially those of the household of faith, right? So we are advocating for, Paul says to Timothy and the pastorals and to Titus, Titus chapter 3, several times around verse 8, etc. He says, insist that our people do good works. Command them to do good works. Well, what is he talking about there? Well, yes, he's talking about, purchasing coats for orphans who don't have coats and winter is coming. But he's also talking about entering these discussions of justice and fair treatment, something like the redistribution of land and fair play there, right? And this is a place where I think, again, if our churches and our vision of Christianity is properly prophetic, then we have to enter a critique of those policies and regimes and those systems that are unjust. That's what the prophets do, right? And so if we're prophetic preachers, when we come to a text that speaks to this issue of giving to Caesar what is Caesar and God's what is God's, or get, submit to government, when we come to these various texts, we got to wrestle then with the proper application of the whole Bible to those kinds of issues, right? Rather than retreating to generalities and superficialities and pious trivialities, right? We've got to have preaching that has teeth in order to shape the conscience of our people and in order to awaken God's people to bear witness on these issues that really do need God's voice interjected into them. Otherwise, they will always be unjust. We just need to. If Christians don't bear witness in the public square, our governments will always be unjust. because they're fallen, right? They don't have salt and light in them apart from Christians being in them, right? And so we want to have a sense of vocation that some Christians are even called to this kind of public service, to elected office and things of that sort. And we want to have a sense of discipleship, that the whole Christian community should be equipped from the Word of God to think Christianly, to think biblically about these issues, so that we can be faithful in bearing witness about these issues on behalf of our neighbors and our nations and ourselves.
All right, so that was Pastor Thabiti giving us some perspective. If you guys have enjoyed that video, the longer video that we actually did with him, I'll put it in the description box for you to have a look at. We spoke about a lot of stuff. We spoke about racial stuff. We spoke about the gospel and culture, and how do you maintain your Christian, identity, but at the same time keeping your African identity. All those things. If you are keen on those topics, Pastor Thabiti has given us a lot in this video. The video is actually a lot longer than what we shared, but it was just to give you guys a biblical framework on how you can think biblically about things like land, about politics, about voting, about elections. And it also calls the church to also disciple people as well when it comes to these topics, because really the church is the hope of the world. And so if we're not equipped to speak out on these things, to enter these discussions, actually, we cannot complain when we see the world drifting, or seeing governments actually not glorifying God. There's a famous statement, I think it comes from Proverbs, that says, when good men do nothing, evil prevails. So I want to leave you guys with that. And this is Bisrat for Africa, a channel dedicated to giving you Christian commentary on religious and spiritual matters. We'll see you guys on the next video.